Imagine a young woman named Serafina. Her skin was the color of rich earth, and her heart was a drum beating a rhythm of pure terror. At 18 years old, she should have been dreaming of university and her first love. Instead, she was wearing a wedding dress that felt more like a burial shroud. Her father, a man whose gambling debts had grown like a cancer, had sold her. To settle a debt of 30 million won, he had traded his only daughter to a man she had never met. They told her he was 50 years old. They told her he was a wealthy businessman. Most importantly, they told her he was impotent, that he could not perform the duties of a husband. In their twisted minds, this was supposed to comfort her. It was supposed to make the forced marriage feel safer, like she was simply going to be a caretaker for an old man. But as Serafina stood in the massive penthouse suite on her wedding night, the air felt thick with a danger she couldn't name. She was a lamb dressed for slaughter, waiting for the butcher to enter the room. The glittering skyline of Seoul mocked her through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was in a cage of glass and gold, and there was no one left in the world to hear her scream. The heavy double doors of the suite creaked open, and Kang Min-ho stepped inside. He did not look like an old man. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and silver threading through his thick black hair. His face was carved from granite, handsome yet terrifyingly cold. He didn't knock, he simply entered as a king enters his conquered territory. Serafina's breath caught in her throat. This was not the frail businessman she had pictured. His suit was impeccable, and his movements were as precise as a predator's. He closed the distance between them with measured steps, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You're trembling," he observed. His voice was smooth as silk, but carried the weight of a death sentence. Serafina pressed her back against the cold window pane. "They told me about your condition," she whispered, her voice shaking. Min-ho let out a low, dry chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "They told you I was impotent, that I couldn't touch you?" He stepped closer, so close she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and expensive tobacco. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing her jawline. His touch was surprisingly gentle, almost reverent, but his eyes remained calculating. "And you believed that meant you were safe. My last 3 wives believed the same thing. They thought a man who couldn't bed them had no use for them. They were wrong." Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. "What happened to them?" she asked. Min-ho's smile widened, becoming something beautiful and absolutely terrifying. "They disappointed me. Get some rest, Serafina. Tomorrow you will learn what I actually bought you for." He left her alone in the massive suite, and Serafina sank to the floor, her white dress pooling around her like spilled milk. She spent the night awake, watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling. The next morning, a woman named Mrs. Choi, the head housekeeper, arrived with a neutral expression. "Mr. Kang requests your presence for breakfast," she stated. The breakfast room was a cathedral of marble and crystal. Min-ho sat at the head of a table long enough to seat 20 people, focused on a newspaper. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he commanded. Staff appeared with enough food to feed a small army. "Eat," he said, finally lowering the paper. "You're too thin. That will change." Serafina felt a spark of defiance. "Why does it matter what I look like if you can't fulfill the marriage?" Min-ho's eyes flickered with a dangerous light. "Finish that sentence and you will regret it. My condition is irrelevant to your purpose here." He stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. 3 years ago, an assassination attempt left me damaged. The world believes I am dying out, that my empire will crumble because I have no heir. Rivals are circling like sharks in the water." He turned to her, his face harder than stone. "I need the appearance of a family. You are young and healthy. In 6 months, we will announce a pregnancy. In 9 months, we will present an infant acquired discreetly. You will play the part of the adoring wife, and in return, you and your father will live. If you fail, you will join my previous wives." Later that day, Mrs. Choi took Serafina on a tour of her new prison. The penthouse had 30 rooms, each decorated with military precision, expensive but soulless. "Mr. Kang's bedroom is here," Mrs. Choi said, pointing to closed doors. "You are never to enter without permission. He values his privacy. He has slept very little since the attack." Serafina realized then that Minho was not just a businessman. He was a man backed into a corner, fighting to survive the only way he knew how. He was a monster, yes, but he was also a man who had been broken. That didn't make him less dangerous, it made him more so. Dinner that evening was a quiet, suffocating affair. Minho had changed into a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong, scarred forearms. "Tomorrow, your training begins," he announced. "Tutors will teach you etiquette, language, and culture. You must convince the world we are a real couple." Serafina pushed her plate away. "I was a bookstore clerk, Minho. I don't know how to be a mafia wife." Minho leaned forward, his dark eyes piercing hers. "You're intelligent, and you're motivated. After all, your life depends on it." He stood and circled the table, stopping inches from her. "When we are in public, you will tolerate my touch. You will look at me like you want me, not like you're terrified. Can you do that?" Serafina drew a shaky breath. She stepped closer, closing the gap until her body nearly touched his. She looked up through her lashes and whispered, "Like this?" For the first time, Minho looked genuinely surprised. A flash of something hot and hungry crossed Minho's face before he regained his icy control. "Exactly like that," he murmured. He stepped back abruptly, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. Serafina fled to her room, her heart racing. She told herself it was fear, but her skin still tingled where the air of his presence had brushed her. The following days were a whirlwind of lessons. Professor Lee drilled her on the hierarchy of the underworld, which bosses to bow to and which to treat with subtle disdain. She learned how to pour tea with a steady hand even when her soul was shaking. She learned the nuances of Korean high society, where a single misplaced word could mean a death sentence. Minho watched her progress from the shadows, his expression unreadable. One afternoon, he appeared in the doorway of the study. "Come with me," he said. He took her to a private elevator that led to his garage. "We're going shopping. You need clothes for Friday's gala. It will be your first public appearance as my wife." The car waiting for them was a sleek black Mercedes with windows so dark the world outside looked like a shadow play. Minho sat beside her, his thigh inches from hers, making cold-blooded business calls in rapid Korean. He spoke of cleaning up messes and settling debts in a tone that made Serafina realize just how many lives he held in his hands. They arrived at a boutique so exclusive it had no sign on the door. The staff bowed low to Minho, treating him like a god. "Show her everything suitable for a queen," he commanded. For the next hour, Serafina was paraded before him in gown after gown. He dismissed most with a curt shake of his head, but when she emerged in a deep emerald dress that hugged her curves and flowed into a silken train, he went silent. His eyes traveled over her slowly, and for a moment the mask of the Mafia boss slipped, revealing a man who was very much alive. "That one," he said, his voice dropping an octave. He bought her shoes, jewelry, and bags that cost more than her father's original debt. Serafina realized he was building her image piece by piece, creating a trophy to show his enemies that he was still in control. That evening, back at the penthouse, he summoned her to his study. The room was dark, filled with the smell of old paper and expensive leather. "This folder contains the guest list for Friday," he said, pushing it toward her. "Study it. These people are predators. They will look for any crack in our story. If they suspect you are not happy, they will know I am weak. And if I am weak, we both die." He stood and walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of her. "When we are in public, you will tolerate my touch. You will look at me like you want me, not like you're terrified. Can you do that?" Serafina drew a shaky breath. She stepped closer, closing the gap until her body nearly touched his. She looked up through her lashes and whispered, "Like this?" For the first time, Minho looked genuinely surprised. The night of the gala arrived. Serafina barely recognized the woman in the mirror. With her hair swept up and the emeralds glittering at her throat, she looked untouchable. Minho entered the room, and for the first time, he looked at her with something that wasn't just calculation. It was pride. "Remember," he whispered as they approached the ballroom, "look at me like I hung the moon." As they stepped inside, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi were blinding. Minho's hand was steady on the small of her back, his touch burning through the silk of her dress. He introduced her to businessmen and politicians, his voice warm and adoring. Serafina played her part perfectly, smiling and leaning into him as if he were her entire world. But then a man named Park Ji-sung approached. He was younger, with a predatory smile and eyes that saw too much. "A charming bride, Minho," Park said, his gaze lingering on Serafina. "However did you convince such a beautiful African lady to marry a man of your reputation?" Minho's arm tightened around her waist. "I can be very persuasive when I see something I want," he replied. Park turned to Serafina. "And what does a girl your age see in a man like him?" Serafina didn't hesitate. She looked up at Minho and said softly, "I see a man who protects what is his. He makes me feel safe in a world of wolves." Park's smile faltered, outmaneuvered by her conviction. The music for the opening waltz began. Minho led her to the center of the floor, dozens of eyes tracking their every move. They had practiced in his study, but here, with the stakes so high, the air felt electric. Minho held her closer than was strictly necessary, his hand firm on her back. They moved in perfect sync, a beautiful lie dancing for an audience of killers. "You're doing well," he murmured against her ear. "Just keep breathing." But the peace was short-lived. A young diplomat named James Morrison approached, asking for a dance. Minho went rigid, his jaw clenching. Serafina, trying to be a good diplomat's wife, accepted. As she danced with James, she could feel Minho's gaze burning into her from across the room. He looked like a storm cloud ready to burst. When the dance ended, Minho was there immediately, practically pulling her away. "What the hell was that?" he demanded in a low, dangerous voice as they reached a quiet corner. "I was being polite," she hissed. "Polite?" he growled. "You are supposed to be so in love with me that you can't bear the touch of another man. You made me look like a fool." Serafina's anger flared. "You're the one who bought me, Minho. Don't get angry because I'm playing the role too well." Minho gripped her chin, his eyes dark with a possessive fury. "Is that what you think this is? A role?" The ride home was silent and suffocating. Back at the penthouse, Minho paced the living room like a caged animal. "They all think you're miserable," he growled. "They think a girl like you must be starving for a real man because I am broken." Serafina stepped toward him, her heart pounding. "Is that what this is about? Your pride?" Minho stopped and looked at her, his mask finally shattering. "I wanted to break his hands for touching you. That's not acting, Serafina. That's real." He admitted that the rumor of his impotence was a lie, a strategic weakness he had cultivated to make his enemies careless. "I recovered months ago," he confessed, his voice rough, "but I let the world believe I was useless. I even let you believe it because I thought it would make you feel safer." Serafina's mind reeled. "You lied to me this whole time? We could have... Minho stepped into her space, his breath hot on her face. "Yes, I could have, and God help me, I have wanted to every single night. I watched you sleep, wanting to claim you, but I stayed away because I didn't want to be another monster in your life." He pulled her flush against him, letting her feel the truth of his desire. "So now you know. I want you. I have wanted you since the moment you walked into this house." Serafina's breath hitched. The fear was still there, but it was being drowned out by a fire she hadn't expected to feel. She had spent weeks convincing herself she hated him, but in the heat of his gaze, she realized she had been lying to herself too. "Show me," she whispered. Minho's control snapped. He kissed her with a desperate hunger, his mouth claiming hers as if he were a drowning man and she was his only heir. He swept her up in his arms and carried her into his bedroom, the forbidden space she had never been allowed to enter. It was a room of black and chrome, cold and masculine, but it turned into a furnace that night. He touched her with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, worshiping every inch of her skin. The connection between them was electric, a collision of two lonely souls who had finally found a place to belong. In the aftermath, as they lay tangled in the silken sheets, Serafina realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer a book clerk, and she was no longer a lamb. She was the woman of a man who would burn the world to keep her warm. But as she watched him sleep, she wondered if a love built on such a dark foundation could ever truly survive the light of day. The next morning, Serafina woke up alone in the massive bed. For a moment, panic seized her. Had it all been a dream? Or worse, had he regretted it? She dressed quickly and found him in the dining room, dressed in a sharp suit, looking like the cold Mafia boss once again. But when his eyes met hers, they softened just a fraction. "I had a meeting I couldn't skip," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "I didn't want to wake you." The domesticity of the moment felt strange after the passion of the night. Over the next month, their relationship fell into a new rhythm. They were still careful in public, but in private, the walls had come down. Minho began to share the details of his business with her, valuing her perspective. He sketched her while she read, his charcoal movements fluid and peaceful. They were falling for each other, two people caught in a web of their own making. But the world outside was still full of wolves. Park Ji-sung had been asking questions. He had been digging into Serafina's past, looking for the debt that had brought her to Seoul. He knew the marriage was a transaction, and he was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One evening, Minho's second-in-command, Yu Junyo, arrived with grim news. "Park knows about the debt," Junyo reported. "He's meeting with your rivals. They are planning to move against you if they can prove the marriage is a sham." Minho's face hardened. He turned to Serafina. "We have to move up the timeline. We must announce the pregnancy this weekend." Serafina felt a chill. "But it's only been 6 weeks. People will know." "We don't have a choice," Minho said, his voice tight with an old, familiar coldness. "I will have doctors falsify the records. We must make this real before Park can destroy us." The news felt like a bucket of ice water over their growing romance. It was a reminder that, to the world, she was still just a tool for his survival. Minho became distant again, buried in maps and ledgers, preparing for a war he knew was coming. Serafina tried to reach him, but he deflected her. "Stay out of this, Serafina," he warned. "The less you know, the safer you are." But Serafina knew that in Minho's world, there was no such thing as safety. She realized that by trying to protect her, he was pushing her back into the cage she had just escaped. The night before the announcement, Serafina confronted him in his study. "You're doing it again," she said. "You're making decisions for me without asking." Minho didn't look up. "I'm keeping you alive." "By treating me like a ghost?" she shot back. Minho finally looked at her, and she saw the raw fear in his eyes. "Park isn't just asking questions anymore. He's making threats. If he gets to you, I will have nothing left. I'm pushing you away because I can't breathe when I think about you in danger." Serafina crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. "We are in this together, Minho. Whether you like it or not, don't fight me." Minho's shoulders slumped, and he pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her neck. "I'm a monster, Serafina. I'll drag you down with me." "Then we'll go down together," she whispered. The charity luncheon was a battlefield. Park Ji-sung cornered them near the balcony, his smile mocking. "A pregnancy already. How remarkably convenient, Minho. It's almost as if you're trying to stop a coup." Minho's grip on Serafina's hand was bone-crushing. "Speculation is a dangerous hobby, Park," he replied. Park turned to Serafina. "Tell me, Mrs. Kang, was it love at first sight, or did your father simply run out of options?" The room went silent. Serafina felt Minho's body tensing, his hand reaching for the weapon hidden in his jacket. If she didn't act, blood would be spilled right there on the white carpet. She stepped forward, standing between the two men. "Tell me you want the truth, Park," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My father owed money. He tried to sell me. Minho found out and paid the debt, not because he needed a wife, but because he wanted to save a girl from men like you. He saved me, and in return, I found a man worth loving. If you think our marriage is a sham, you're welcome to try your luck against a man who has everything to lose." The crowd erupted in murmurs. She had turned Park's accusation into a romantic tale of rescue and redemption. Minho looked at her with a fierce, burning pride. Park's smile vanished. He had been outplayed. He was outplayed. "How touching," he muttered, retreating into the crowd. In the car afterwards, Minho pulled her into a searing kiss. "That was brilliant and incredibly dangerous." "I told the truth," she said. "You did save me." But the victory was short-lived. 2 weeks later, as Serafina was returning from a doctor's appointment, a black van swerved in front of her car. Men in masks dragged her out before her guards could react. She was tossed into the back of the van, a hood pulled over her head. She woke up tied to a chair in a damp, dark room. The smell of salt and rot told her she was near the docks. Park Ji-sung stepped into the light, his face twisted with malice. "Your little speech was very moving, Serafina, but let's see how much Minho loves you when his empire is burning." He had called Minho, telling him he had her. "He's on his way with his men," Park laughed. "And while he's busy trying to find you, my allies are taking over his warehouses and his docks. By the time he gets here, he'll be a king of nothing." Serafina struggled against her bonds. "He'll kill you." "Maybe," Park said, "but you'll be the message I send him." Footsteps thundered outside, followed by the rhythmic crack of gunfire. The door exploded inward, and Minho stood there, a silencer in his hand, his eyes cold as the grave. He moved through the room with a lethal efficiency, taking down Park's men before they could even raise their weapons. He didn't look like the man who sketched her in the morning. He looked like the god of death. Park Ji-sung grabbed Serafina, pressing a gun to her temple. "Drop it, Minho, or she dies." Minho stopped. His gun was aimed at Park's head, his hand steady as a rock. "You made a mistake, Park. You touched what's mine." "I'm holding all the cards," Park screamed. Minho's smile was terrifying. "You think she makes me weak? You think caring for her makes me vulnerable? You're wrong. She's my heart, and you just gave me a reason to burn the world down." Serafina looked at Minho and saw the truth. His love for her had made him the most dangerous man alive. Park's hand trembled. He had expected a desperate man. He found a monster with a purpose. "Drop it!" Park yelled again. Minho's eyes met Serafina's for a split second. He saw the fire in her eyes, the silent plea to finish it. He didn't hesitate. His shot was perfect, catching Park in the shoulder and spinning him away. In the same heartbeat, Minho's men flooded the room. Minho was at her side in an instant, cutting her ropes, his hands roaming her face to check for injuries. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I've got you." The fallout of the kidnapping was a bloodbath. Minho spent the next 48 hours dismantling Park Ji-sung's organization piece by piece. He was relentless, showing no mercy to anyone who had helped in the abduction. Serafina stayed in the penthouse, protected by a small army. When Minho finally returned, he was covered in the dust of war. He walked straight to her and collapsed, his head in her lap. "It's over," he murmured. "They won't come for you again." Serafina stroked his hair. "And the empire?" Minho looked up. "I lost some warehouses, I lost some money, but I didn't lose you. That's the only victory that matters." He told her that he was tired of the lies. He was tired of the fake pregnancy and the shadow games. "I'm going to tell the truth," he said, "that I'm recovered, that our marriage was a deal, but that I love you. If they want to challenge my leadership because I'm a man who loves his wife, then let them come. I've never lost a war yet." Serafina felt a weight lift off her shoulders. "No more lies," she agreed. The announcement shocked the underworld. Some allies turned their backs, but many more stayed, moved by Minho's transparency and his newfound strength. He was no longer a man hiding his wounds. He was a man who had healed. Serafina stood by his side at every meeting, her presence a silent testament to his resilience. She was no longer just the African wife. She was the queen of the Kang Empire. 3 months later, Minho took her back to the island where they had spent their first peaceful weekend. At sunset, on the same white sand, he dropped to one knee. This time, he didn't have a contract or a debt. He had a ring, a brilliant emerald surrounded by diamonds. "Serafina," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I asked you to marry me once as a command. Now, I'm asking as a man who cannot live without you. Will you marry me for real? Will you be my partner in everything?" Serafina didn't need to think. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him up for a kiss that tasted like the future. They were married again 6 months later, in a ceremony that was small and beautiful. There were no cameras, no rival bosses, just people who truly cared for them. Serafina's father was there, sober and tearful, finally realizing the treasure he had almost thrown away. When Serafina walked down the aisle, she didn't feel like a lamb. She felt like a woman who had walked through fire and come out gold. 2 years later, the nursery in the penthouse was no longer a lie. A baby girl with earth-toned skin and her father's dark, curious eyes slept in a crib made of white oak. Minho stood in the doorway, watching them with a contentment he had never known. "She's asleep," Serafina whispered. Minho crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he murmured. "I love you more," she replied. They had built a life on a foundation of broken glass, but they had polished it until it shone like a diamond. Minho was still the boss, still a man of power, but he was also a father and a husband. He had learned that love wasn't a weakness, it was the ultimate protection. As the baby grew, the stories of the Afro-Korean boss and his queen became a legend in the streets of Seoul. People spoke of the man who would burn a city for his wife and the woman who had the courage to love a monster. They became a symbol of a new kind of power, one based on loyalty and truth rather than fear and secrets. Linda's Foundation for Immigrant Women became one of the largest in Asia, and Minho's business moved entirely into legitimate tech and shipping. They had transcended their pasts. One evening, they sat on the balcony watching their daughter take her first steps. "We did it," Serafina said, her eyes bright. "We turned a nightmare into a dream." Minho kissed her hand. "No, Serafina, you turned a monster into a man." They sat in the silence of the Seoul night, two people who had found salvation in a desperate kiss. They knew that there would be more challenges, more wolves in the dark, but they were no longer afraid, for they had the greatest weapon of all, a love that had survived the impossible. "The fire is low now, my children, and it is time for you to sleep, but carry this story in your hearts. Remember that your circumstances do not define you. Remember that even when you feel like a lamb, you have the heart of a lion." Serafina was sold for a debt, but she became the master of her own destiny. Minho was a man of violence, but he chose to be a man of love. They found each other in a world that tried to pull them apart, and they stayed together because they were brave enough to be honest. The neon lights of Seoul still flicker, and the shadows are still long. But if you look closely, you will see the light of a penthouse high above the city, where a family lives in peace. Let that light guide your dreams. Let it remind you that no matter how much you owe the world, you always own your soul.
As you drift off, think of the emerald dress and the black diamond ring. Think of the sketches in the study and the laughter in the nursery. Life is not a fairy tale, but we can make it one through the choices we make. We can choose to be victims, or we can choose to be heroes. We can choose to be alone, or we can choose to be together. Serafina and Minho chose each other, and in doing so, they changed their world. May you find the courage to make your own choices. May you find a love that makes you feel safe and a purpose that makes you feel powerful. The story is told, the lesson is clear, and the fire is but a glow. Sleep well, little ones. Sleep well. And if you ever walk the streets of Gangnam and see a tall man with silver hair and a beautiful black woman by his side, know that you are looking at the survivors. Know that you are looking at the people who refused to let the darkness win. They are still there, a living legend in a city of millions. They are the proof that love is the only thing that lasts. They are the reason we tell these stories by the fire, to keep the light alive in a world of shadows. Good night, my dear children. Good night. The embers are fading, and the night belongs to the moon. This story of the Mafia boss and the African lady who dared to love him is now part of your spirit. Use it well. Let it give you strength when you are afraid. Let it give you hope when you are lost. For every ending is just a new beginning in disguise. The story of Serafina and Minho is finished, but yours is just starting. Make it a story worth telling. Make it a story of love. The final spark of the fire dies out, and the room is still, but the warmth remains. The warmth of a love that conquered the mafia, the debt, and the secrets. The warmth of a family that found peace in the heart of a storm. Farewell, little ones, until the next time the fire is lit and the stories begin again. Remember the kiss in Gangnam. Remember the Queen of Seoul. Remember that you are never, ever truly alone. Please, if you haven't subscribed, please click on that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, so when I post more interesting stories, you'll be the first to get them. I really appreciate you. I do not take your support for granted. See you in my next video. Bye-bye.